Hey guys, I thought I would get with you and make an updated video about how to make 300 Blackout Brass with the Lee quick trim setup. Powered quick trim, I guess is what you want to say here. So I made a video, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. It's been pretty popular and I think a lot of people have gotten some use out of it. There's been a few people had some problems along the way. I've learned a few things along the way. That was several years ago. So I thought I would make a refinement video. Kind of go back over a few of the steps. The other video is still good. It still works. Most everything is the same. But like I said, there's a few things to help people that I've learned, you know, from my own failures, I guess, and also from helping other people who've contacted me and said, hey, this didn't work for me or whatever. So that's what's going to be in this video. So here we are. We're starting off with the Drill Master mini cutoff saw from Harbor Freight. You guys have seen these. There's variants of them out there. Lots of different ones. This is a Squirrel Daddy jig. You have to have a jig. You need some way to set a stop so that you get the same cut length every time. Now, one thing that I want to hammer home 1000% is if you want to try to use this setup to make your own 300 Blackout Brass, you've got to do something very specific. You have to keep the trim burden down, meaning you can't just hack it off anywhere, you know, at the shoulder and just run this thing down. It won't cut that much off. It's just not made for that. It's a trimmer. It was never made to actually be to make 300 Blackout Brass, so it won't machine off a lot of material. My rule of thumb, and I have used this out to, you know, 25 thousandths of trim. It's a lot more time consuming. And there's a lot more possibility for failure the longer you get away from the final trim. So I like to keep this trim within about 10 thousandths if I can. Now you want to have some trim length. You don't want to get too close because when you finalize the trim, you also square the neck. So there's no way you're going to get a perfectly square neck out of here off of one of these things. It's just it's not a fine enough instrument. But this will give you a square neck. But listen to me. You have to take the time to get your jig set within like a couple thousandths if you want this to work right for you. So that is the time-consuming and frustrating thing. But if you take the time and you just keep, you know, cycling it, locking it, checking it, locking it, checking it, moving it, locking it, checking it. If you keep doing that until you get exactly where you want to be, this works great. I can't think of an easier way to make brass. So that's the first point I want to drive home. That is critical to make for this process to work. So that's so anyway, there you go. So the first tip I'm going to give you that that I just kind of stumbled on accidentally is to put it. You see, I've got this mounted all the way to the edge of my bench here, and the reason for that is because I have found that if you just put a bucket underneath the overhang of the bench, when you cut your brass, it slides right off. It just keeps sliding off and tailing off. Now I know there's some new versions of this, these jigs out there. In fact, there's a whole bunch of them out there. But I used to have all the brass pile up out here, all the little nubs and the necks and stuff, and they pile up, and I'm pretty soon I have to stop and clear it out. Well, that doesn't do that. They just fall off and they fall in there, and I don't have to clear anything, and I can just keep going. Really improves the operation. So I'll show you a little bit of that and then we'll move on. Oh, one thing I want to say is any of you Squirrel Daddy jig maker dudes out there, if you want to really up your game and make a better jig, if you put a set screw, some sort of screw backstop, so that when you bring this back here, if I need to adjust this cut instead of moving the whole block around, I could just put an Allen head or something, or a screwdriver or whatever in there and just tighten, you know, make a screw adjustment to adjust where my head stop is so I can set my dimension after I lock the jig in place. That would be amazing. So, Squirrel Daddy, whoever you are, there's version 10.0, whatever you're up to. Okay, so you get the picture. So as far as setting the dimension goes, here's the thing to consider. This brass is Lake City. I always try to get Lake City single head stamp. There's guys that sell it off the internet. They're picking up military or police or whatever. I try to avoid mixed head stamp. That's just some, things over time. For making 300 blackout, now I actually don't care that much about 223, but for making 300 blackout, I like mixed. I like to get my Lake City brass. I always know it's going to work. So here's the deal. This brass has been fired. It's just like it was picked up. I've already swaged the primer pockets. I do that when I first get them. But as far as that goes, it's never been through a sizer. So when I set this dimension here, let's see what I got this set to. Please don't make a liar on me. Okay. So my final trim length, what I shoot for, is 1.360. The max is going to be 1.368, and I don't remember what the minimum is, but so 1.360. Now you see I'm pretty much where I want to be right now. Now here's what's going to happen. This brass has never been through a sizer, so when I run it through the sizing die or form it, however you want to say it, it's going to shrink back down to its a smaller spec, and it's going to stand up and get a little bit longer. Most cases, it's going to get about 6 to 10 thousandths longer on average. I would guess about 8, but that depends on the diameter of the chamber it was originally fired in. So when I set this, I set it for as close to my final trim length, knowing that when I run it through the forming die or sizing die, it's going to get a little longer. That's going to be the area that I trim. Now here's the caveat. If you have 223 brass that you've already sized, it's not going to get longer. If you have your jig set knowing that the brass you're cutting is going to grow and give you trim room, and you try to do this with already sized brass, that brass is not going to grow significantly enough to give you trim room. So in that case, I would set this trim jig, if I was cutting sized brass, I would set it to 1.368, and that would give me 8 thousandths of trim back. So I hope I made that clear. I hope that made sense. But that is critical. So different settings for different brass. Okay, there it is. Here's the goods. Already got some I did over here, so we'll move on to the next step. So in the first video that I made back years ago, I didn't do any deburring. And you still don't need to. It still works just fine if you don't. But I have taken to trying to make a little more quality brass. By quality, I mean brass that shoots more accurately. So I have actually gone back and I started deburring before I run them through the sizer. Now, they'll go through just fine in my experience. I've never had any issues. But what I have decided is, because I'd focus on accuracy more and making better quality brass, is that I don't want any material in the neck area from the trimming to be included in the dimension of the neck when it goes through the sizer. So I don't want any of those burrs to push the neck out of concentricity. Can't say the word. To make it not concentric. That's what I'm looking for. So I do now go back and take all those little burrs out so that it's as clean on all the edges as I can when it goes through, to try to make a better piece of brass. And we're going to cover more on accuracy in the coming parts. So that is a refinement. All right, so we have trimmed to our controlled length. It's around about 1.360 as we can get it. That's a feat, let me tell you. That takes a lot of adjustment. So we have more or less deburred these, taking the big boogers out of them. I've got my Lee 300 Blackout resizing die that we're going to use for forming. Now, there's a lot of discussion out there about whether or not this is a good die for that. And I've got videos on it. I'm not going to reiterate, but some folks with tight chambers have trouble getting this die to work for them. That's just the way it is. So, like I said, I've got a couple of videos that describe that. I describe it in the first trimming video. And I also have another video on it, so I won't go into that. You're welcome to look that up if you have any questions. Okay, so here we go. Now you see that case went from 1.360 to 1.370. That's a 10,000th increase. Now that's exactly what we want. We want just enough growth for that to get longer so that we have a little tiny bit to trim off and keep it well within the trim die's capabilities to be successful. So I'm using Imperial Resizing die wax for this because I don't like stuck cases. So this does a good job. It just goes in like butter, piece of cake. I think that I've learned over time that getting the shoulder in the same place also has something to do with getting the appropriate amount of lube. I notice when I do shoulder setback on cases that I get a variance if I don't get the same amount of lube. So if one goes into the die a little harder, the shoulder ends up in a slightly different position than if the ones that go in nice and lubed. So I'm just talking while I'm working here. But anyway, that's what we're doing. We're putting a little bit of sizing wax on and getting that die all seasoned up with its wax, and so they just go in nice and easy, and we just run through them real quick. So I'm going to finish these up and I'll be back with the next step. Okay, so the next step here, and this is a refinement. I did some of this before, but not really to the extent that I do now. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to get all of that wonderful resizing lube off of these cases. And the reason for that is because this die, the trim die, specific to the 300 Blackout, you can see it right there, it has this, I don't know if it's neoprene or I don't know what it is. It's a hard kind of rubberized. Let me see if I can get that to focus. You can see mine's all chewed up because this is my original die. I've made thousands of rounds in this, but it's got some sort of silicone type rubberized filler in there, and that has to grab the round and hold it while the cutter does its job. So if you've got a bunch of that lube in there, it's just not going to work. It's gonna get slippery, and it's gonna the case is gonna start spinning. And if your trim length is short and you're spinning and you're not getting, I mean, if you have a lot of overburden and you're having to trim a lot off, your cases will get hot. They'll also get hot if they're spinning, where you're not having to trim very much. Let's say you're trying to trim off about 8/1000ths and you're just not getting there. It could be that your case is actually spinning in the die. It's grabbed the cutter head and it's just turning. So what I do is I'm just doing 50 here, so I'm just going to wipe them down with a rag with some acetone on it to cut that grease. So there's no grease left on there when I'm done. You don't have to do it this way. I don't even do it this way all the time. If I'm doing a big batch, I will throw them in a tumbler and put some real harsh cleaner in there and knock that grease off. Take them back out and finish the trim on them. So I'm going to go ahead and clean these up and I'll bring you back in. All right, so we cleaned up all our brass. Now, one thing we could do is if we're having trouble with our old die, and maybe we've gotten it a little contaminated with oils, what I have taken to doing is just cleaning the die. So in this case, I've just taken a 30 caliber cleaning rod here and a patch, and I just go in here and wipe this sucker out. Now, you got to be careful with this. I'm using acetone. Acetone can be tough on some materials. It doesn't seem to hurt this, so whatever it is, it seems to be resistant to that. You know, PVC and some things will literally melt in there, but this one doesn't seem to have a problem with it. So that's what I use to clean. You could use alcohol or whatever, but you just want to get a really dry surface. In the past, I've blown it out with Break Free. That's another one I use quite a bit in the shop here. So that's a way you can get it squeaky clean. Now, when this goes in here and you push it in, it has to really grab, and I can feel that grabbing right there. And that's how that works best. So you have to be able to counteract the torque that the cutter is going to put on it. All right, so let's spend a little bit of time on understanding the cutter here. So the first thing, I don't want to do that. Just threw my adjustment off. Whoops. So the first thing I'll cover, I covered this in the previous video, but this is important enough, I'm going to cover it again. So if you look in here, you have a series of springs. And those springs put tension on these individual blades. And there's 3 of them there, and they're supposed to be able to move independently. Each one has its own spring, represented here. So when you get this sucker, it comes with a 3/8 ball that's supposed to push down on those springs and put a little more tension on the inside ones. And I don't know, it's kind of a wacky setup, but that's what they used. I never liked it. I never liked the way it worked on intermediate cartridges like 223 or the 300 Blackout. So one thing I came up with, or actually what I would say is, the 300 Blackout tells you to take this out in the directions, take this one out, but what happens is, this is cone shaped up inside, so this little tiny spring that does the inside cutter just kind of drifts away up in there and doesn't have any tension on it, so it doesn't do a good job. So I came back and found that if I downsized the bearing, this is an airsoft, this is a 1/4 inch bearing, whatever you can find, but I downsized the spacer to a 1/4 inch and it works like a champ. So that's what I use for all the intermediate size cartridges. 223 Blackout, Grendel, 76239. I just use that little tiny ball and it just hits those inner ones, and it really gives me the spring tension I'm looking for on the inside, but not so much on the outside, which already have a stronger spring. So there you go. That's a important point. So the next thing, the way this works is these floating blades are for doing your chamfering inside and out in one shot. So it's a pretty ingenious design. So they need to be able to, when you first come in here, they need to be able to push all the way out of the way so that the main cutter, which is right here, can get to the case and do the cutting. If for some reason these things are wedged up and they won't retract into the cutter like they're supposed to, then I get a bad situation. And what it looks like when that happens is you end up with this. See that sucker? That is chewed up. Looks like it's been in a garbage disposal. It will eat it up. So I've had people tell me that they had that very thing, and I have too, obviously. So what happens is there's 2 things that cause that. One, you get too much material built up from doing a lot of trimming, and these blades just can't get out of the way. They're stuck. And really for that, all you need to do is just activate them, and you'll see the crud start falling out of them. So if that happens, you can even stop in the middle and pull it out and give it a couple of those just to clean up. But if you start getting results like that, that's one thing. Another thing that causes it is trying to trim too much, so these blades get tied up in there too fast. And what happens when you have too much trimming that you're trying to do is this cutter you can actually bend these ears. And when this thing comes in and it grabs and they just get bent. And when that happens, that one folds this way and one folds that way, and now these won't retract. If that ever happens to you, you can take this apart, you can push this little pin out. You have to retract the blades to get to a sweet spot, and you push this little pin out carefully. It should go without force. So if it's not, there's a little slot that has to line up down in the blade for this to come through. You can take these out and you can put them on something flat, and you can literally hammer them back to their original shape and clean them up and then put them back in. I've done it a couple times. So there's a couple things. So too long a trim, grabbing too much material, bending the blades, or just general clogging will cause these blades not to retract. If they can't get out of the way, then they're gonna do something you don't want them to do. So there's that covered. What else do we need to know about this? This is your adjusting ring right here. So if you adjust it all the way that way, holding it like I am, that's going to produce the longest case. If you need to shorten the case up, you just ratchet that guy back a little bit like that. So little clicks, 10 clicks this way, 10 clicks this way, total adjustment 10 thousandths. Okay, so another refinement from the previous video. In the previous video, I recommended putting a little WD-40 on here just to make sure you don't get wear while you're doing this. I'm going to refine that to be a little tiny bit of grease on the shoulder here, just so this part rides without wearing down your adjustment ring here. So you could even put just a little bit up here. The reason I don't want to use WD-40 here like I used to is because for two reasons. One, it can create a little, that oil runs down, creates a little ball, and then again, we've already just went to great lengths to clean our die. So these are things I found over time. I think back somewhere along the way, somebody actually mentioned it to me and put it on a couple of my posts. That's great. That's how we do the community stuff. But yeah, that was something that I would not do again. But we don't want that WD-40 running down into that die we just cleaned. So that's another refinement. Okay, so a couple of things I want to cover here. Why do I like this? One, it's inexpensive. So for somebody just starting out making their own 300 Blackout Brass, I could buy more expensive stuff. I still choose to use this. I've been using this all along and never used anything else. So this works for me. It is a little fiddly at times, but it does a good job, and it trims and chamfers all in the same shot. So that's hard to beat, that function alone. Second thing I like is it's got this long, straight shank that fits into this pilot, so it automatically squares itself. So the cases come out just really super square on the neck. And I like that. Even though you have the drill up here, that long pilot area provides a good square guide. So that's something I like. Now, another thing I like is this sets the dimension from the case base to the mouth. There's other ones out there that use the shoulder to set the dimension. So the trimmer comes up and it finds the shoulder and it rides on the shoulder and it cuts down to where it's on the shoulder. So, you know, those are okay. Obviously they work. For me, I prefer to have this fixed dimension from here to here. The shoulder on a Blackout is pretty diminished. It's not much of a shoulder. When you first form them, they're even less. Once you fire them, you get a little bit more of a square shoulder out of them, but the formed shoulder is not very much. So to me, I think that's going to start stacking tolerances to where I can actually be too long or whatever. You know, I haven't used the other one, but I've watched them, and the way I see it, I would prefer to set my dimension from the head than from the shoulder. That's just the way I see it. So now I'm going to use this drill driver. They want you to use a screwdriver speed. I don't. I like something faster. So that's full disclosure. So let's see what we get here when we do this. See what that cut down to. Oops, dead. Now when I was showing you guys that, I unscrewed it a little bit, so I'm going to take a couple of clicks back, see what happens. So here I'm sitting at 1360, which was my target. I find that I have to fiddle with this a little bit till I get the feel for it. Once I get the feel for it, then I'm good. As you put downward pressure on this, you can, if you don't put consistent pressure, you can actually change the cut length a little bit. just by compacting into it. So try to use the same amount of pressure each time you use it. There you go, 360, running pretty true so far. Keep going. Boy, that is just sweet. So one thing I'll show you is when you put your case on your calipers and you spin it, you can really feel that it's nice and square. If you're out around or crooked, if the neck is crooked, you'll find that it'll pivot on one side or the other. So that's something to keep an eye on. But this does a fantastic job of squaring the neck. Now usually what I'll do if I'm doing a big batch is I'll get all set up and I'll get a kind of a routine going. I won't check each one. And then when I'm all done, then I'll sit and check them and throw them in a thing. Every once in a while you get one that you didn't run long enough or whatever. So I always I've gotten bit by that before, so I always come back and check them all just to make sure that they're all consistent lengths. So that's using this driver. I'm going to stop and I'm going to show you my little rig that I do for a little more higher volume. So here's a refinement. You guys know that I build these powder stands, and I've been able to use it as an accessory rack to hold this. Now I leave that loose so it can just kind of float and just kind of hold it back there. And I'm working with trying to figure out what the dimensions are for this, but I've got this Hitachi drill locked in the forward direction, triggers locked on. It's got an adjustment here so I can change the speed, and then I have a foot switch down here that I got from Harbor Freight, and I can just run it with that. I've already made a video on this. This is the first time I've had something a little more organized to do this with. And so this leaves my hands free because I don't have to run the drill. The drill's just stationary over the top. So that's a little something new and unique. We'll run a few like that. Now, once you change the tension, however much tension you're on, I probably have to make a minor adjustment to the cutter. So we'll see how that goes. Uh, 1358. So I'm going to go back a couple thousand. There's 2. Let me back just one. I think I had it right the first time. Let's take a look at these here. I'm pretty close. 1359 and a half. So how good is that, huh? So let's see if I can give you a look at the neck here. That's one shot. Chamfered, you can see the shininess on it. Inside and out. Guys, it doesn't get any easier than that. Once you get the feel, you know, for how you have it set and how much force to put on everything, you can just rip through them pretty fast. So that's my refinement video. basically just a few minor changes to this whole thing. Oh, I've got a 5/16 nut driver in here, so that also accommodates the angle I was talking about. Instead of being clamped directly to the head, I like to have a little bit of pivot there so that the cutter can follow the die. Okay, so we're done with some trimming there. We're gonna move on. I'm gonna show you the last step to make a 300 Blackout Brass. These little chip brushes are great for dusting off powder and, you know, just wiping, cleaning up after spills and getting the brass out of your press there. So here's the refinement step. Now I've got a whole video on this, and I'm not going to go over this in great detail, but basically my refinement is I use a lead collet die to iron out the neck after all the stuff that we've done. And it, in my experience, and lots of other people have good experience with it, it improves accuracy of my completed brass by about 50%. So if I'm getting 3-inch groups on my brand new brass, I can expect to get about 1.5 inches. Now, that's my personal experience. Your mileage may vary, but that's the step that I add, is using this collet die. I will put, at the end of this video, I'll leave links in suggested videos, and one of them is going to be accuracy using the collet die. So you can go check that out if you want to answer, if you have more questions. So basically, it goes something like this. This is already set up, so I'm not going to cover all that. But after I'm all done with all the steps in my brass, I just run them in this collet die and give it a good squish. And what that collet die does, I turn it a quarter, give it another good squish. What these collet dies do is they only mess with the neck. They don't do anything else. So it's got this clamp collet that closes and squishes the neck on a mandrel. So it sort of evens out your neck tension, and it sort of irons out anything that might be weird on the neck after all the stuff we did to it. So that really improves the quality of the brass that you're making. Pardon me. So that's my final step. I suggest you look into that. It's a nice, easy step. It's not hard to do, and it really improves the brass. It helps with concentricity, helps with neck tension, and if there's any rough edges or anything that might push the round to one side or the other, it takes care of that. It also has enough pressure to flow the brass, meaning it can actually move brass around. Squish it literally from a high spot to a low spot. So it really improves the quality of the brass. So that was the one thing I wanted to share with you. Like I said, got other videos on there. I don't want to get into too much detail. I will link up the old video, the video to this, and anything else I think of. All right, so that's a wrap, guys. I'm going to leave it there. Don't want to make this too long. If you like the video, you like where the channel's going, click the subscribe button and help me fight off Google or YouTube or whatever's going to happen to me. I'm sure I'll be gone one of these days, but I'm going to hang in there and keep doing this. Keep an eye out over at Reloaders Network. I'm over there, and if we all get canceled or you'll be able to find us there and find our videos elsewhere. So check that out, reloadersnetwork.com. I think that's what it is. I'll look it up. Anyway, you guys take care, and thanks for watching. Hit the like button, and be safe.